So, Nelly, tell me, when you were at school, were you creative?
I was creative but not confident. It's probably the big thing. So I think that yes, I loved art. Mrs. Giles was my art teacher. She was my favorite teacher, and it was no coincidence that I also worked in her family's pub. Um, so yeah, art was my favorite subject at school.
And so, did you think then that you would go into a career that was based around art, creativity?
It's interesting, isn't it? When I was thinking about going to university, I was really torn between a practical, do something that's a sensible job and you can learn from, or doing something creative. I was interested in stage or set design. That was something that I thought, but there was no careers advice really. I remember saying I wanted to travel and someone saying, "Oh, you should be an air hostess." I thought, well, that's not really inspiring to talk about. There are other ways to travel. Um, and I suppose I didn't have, there was no social media, there was no internet, there was no, it was just as good as the person you had a chat to who gave you some ideas. And my confidence wasn't there to forge a path creatively. So I went down a safer route, thinking that maybe if I like that, if I like creativity, that will come. That's probably how I viewed it.
And so, when you went to university, you did study something practical. You studied hospitality and psychology. Is that because of the work that you've done in a pub and you thought, oh, that looks like quite an interesting sector? So, did that lead you in that direction, or was there something else?
No, there was literally nothing else. I've had part-time jobs since I was quite young and always defaulted to the hospitality industry. It's an easy thing to work in. It's a very common first job. And I thought, I don't know, I'll work in maybe in hotels, maybe in restaurants. There wasn't a huge amount of thought. And I think it's interesting speaking to my children now about going to university. And I do say doing something you love is really important because you are supposed to do some work. And I will hasten, I was at a polytechnic. I don't think I'd have got into a university. Um, and it seemed an obvious thing. Well, I know I can work in this. I'd worked in it for years. I knew I could work. So again, a practical safety route looking forward. That it seemed like a sensible, boring word, sensible thing to do.
And so, obviously, then that must have informed your choice post university. So, tell the listeners about that. You finished your degree. What did you do then?
Well, I did lots of traveling actually because I was very keen to. I went straight to poly from school, and I'd always had a hankering to do some travel. So I worked in the hospitality industry because it was an easy way to work, earn money to go and do some traveling, and then come back and do the same thing. Um, so I suppose up until I joined Alitex, all my work, unusually, I suppose, has been in the topic I studied for a degree, and in various guises. But I suppose I was very fortunate when I started out in the 90s working in the hospitality industry. There was this real growing new pub culture. I worked in the first ever Slug and Lettuce when I was at Polytechnic, and it was called the Slug and Lettuce at the Crown pub in Cirencester. And I worked there for the summer because we had to do work experience as part of our degree. So I worked there, had a great time, and I thought, I like this sector. This is fun, it's vibrant, it's doing fun food, it's not a stuffy hotel. At that point, at the Poly, they were talking about working for Trust House 40 or Grand Metropolitan Hotel, something very, going to work in a uniform with a name badge, which didn't really grab me. And I was really very lucky to meet an amazing woman called Amanda Wilmot. This is after various other sort of restaurant iterations, who was setting up something called All Bar One or Bass. And it was a truly remarkable journey. Worked with Amanda and a team she put together, and we opened the first 20 All Bar Ones. And I look in, I read, quite an avid reader, and you read books where All Bar One is a reference point where, we met in All Bar One, having been part of that. So I think I was just really fortunate that I had the sweet spot of joining the hospitality industry when there was a lot of fun to be had and some really new dynamic brands that were coming into the fore. So yeah, that was really fortunate actually, and it was great fun. I had a brilliant 10 years probably working with Amanda doing All Bar One, and then latterly we did something called the Ha Ha Bar and Canteen, which was a foodier, more grown-up version of All Bar One. And yeah, it was lovely. It was great working with lots of fun people and traveling all across the UK, setting up bars, getting to know different cities. So it was a great experience.
And Nelly, when you worked there, Haha Bars and All Bar One, what did you do? What was your job?
My job was the brand manager. So it was, I don't know why, but I was involved with the team who were doing site finding. So I was lucky enough to go through the whole journey of each bar. So it was standing in street corners, walking around on a Saturday night going, yeah, this does seem like it's got good footfall, taking it through to Basque, who were backing us, acquired the sites. Then I would often be in the planning process to make sure we got our planning permission, then working with the teams on site to do the build as the sort of client in those situations, helping to get involved in recruiting the teams locally. So I'd be on the ground, say it was at Sheffield or Glasgow or Norwich, getting the teams and then helping do the team training, trying to get them ready for a launch. And then I'd go and do the next one. And there were ops teams who kind of continued sort of overseeing day-to-day stuff. And I did oversee all the bars on their standards. So doing a brand audit, going around I'd turn up and part of their bonus was on the brand audit and I'd see them go, no, running around behind the scenes, trying to get everything shipshape. So yeah, it was quite all inclusive. It was very intense. It probably wasn't. I was single. I had no ties, no commitments, and it was the perfect role for that.
And in terms of your creative expertise, skills, how did they start to manifest themselves in those hospitality jobs?
I suppose one thing I was lucky with was being given the freedom to be able to have an instinct for things. And that doesn't always happen. I think I was very fortunate that we had people, the team that was being nurtured were allowed their own confidence, just in terms of, how do we communicate locally with people? What print material do we create? What environment are we trying to create? So I think creativity was as much as anything in how do we build our teams? How do we keep them motivated? How do we have fun? So it wasn't obvious, we didn't have a website. This was pre-website days, so there was no social media. There was no, it was very old-fashioned, a poster in the window or print. And I suppose just being very instinctive and then being allowed to be instinctive. I think if I'm doing something and I love it, I can do it really well. If I'm not convinced by, the product that I'm supposed to be selling, and I'm probably going to find that harder. So I wouldn't necessarily be good if I worked in an ad agency or something like that. If it's like, right, market this, I don't know, Jägermeister. I hate Jägermeister, but my face would say it all. So I think if I love something, I can really get behind it and be very genuine. I think being very genuine about what you're talking about and you're enthusiastic. And I think that's what I try and portray to my kids is what you go on to do. If you can love it, if you really can love it and enjoy it and get excited about it, you just change. Your demeanor changes when you're amongst it. If that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. And so tell us all about the switch then from being in brand marketing with hospitality businesses to Alitex. And there's a disclaimer for all the listeners that comes here. I'm a huge fan of Alitex. I have one of your greenhouses at home, which I've had for about 10 years and I love. And when I go to Chelsea, one of the first stands I always go to is your stand, because I think you do them so beautifully. The stands are wonderful. The greenhouses are wonderful. So a disclaimer at the start that I'm a fan, but tell everybody who's listening how you got into Alitex from the hospitality industry.
I was opening a bar in Bristol and I met this guy called Tom at the gym. That's really cheesy. And basically my flatmate was very keen to go to Chelsea Flower Show, and Tom was involved in Alitex, had been since 1990, I think. And he said, oh yeah, I'll get you guys into Chelsea Flower Show. And we went, met Chris, one of the directors, who's still with us now. It's been at Alitex for donkey's years. And he let us into Chelsea. We had a wonderful, it's my first time going to the show. And then I rang Tom to say thank you very much. And why don't I take you out for a drink to say thanks? And, you know, we got on really well. What I liked was I could talk about my world and he would talk about his world, and you'd sort of exchange ideas and thoughts. And never thought I'd work with Tom. And in fact, early on, we went to Cornwall together, and he was his turn to drive. And he said, oh, we've just done these 360-degree reviews where, you know, we've reviewed others, but they've also reviewed us back. Would you mind reading some of the responses out to me? So I read these out and I'm going, my God, you know, it wasn't flattering. He was in the early days of his career when he's trying to work it all out. And I thought, crikey, never going to work with this guy. But you grow and evolve. And then we had our first child, and I was very anxious about the whole change that would bring to life. We moved house. I was stopping my job at that point, potentially for maternity leave, but I didn't really know how it would pan out. And had our first child just before Christmas. I hung on to the last minute to finish work, had her just before Christmas. And then in February, March, agreed that it just wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to be able to return. It wasn't it wasn't what I needed. It wasn't what they needed. So I suddenly was just restless, I suppose. And Philippa, who was the marketing manager at Alitex at the time, was doing a brochure. And I'd always loved photography. I'd always quite enjoyed taking pictures. So I started taking photos for the brochure, and I just would have a customer's name and I'd give them a call and turn up. And I was self-sufficient. I was in the garden, so I'd had a baby. I could, you know, could do our own thing. And it was lovely. You know, it was beautiful products, meeting people who were just loving their gardens and their greenhouses. And I've always had an appreciation for gardens and outdoors. And it just grew very organically. So then Philippa said, oh, do you want to get involved in helping me put the brochure together? Yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. And then, oh, we're looking at our stand for Chelsea. Do you want to get involved? Yep, love to. And so I've done now, I don't know, 17 Chelseas, 18 Chelseas, maybe more. And for me, that takes me back to the days of opening a bar. Here's a deadline. The deadline isn't going to move. It's got to be done for then. And you want to enchant people. You want people to say what you said earlier. I've got to go to the Altex stand. You know, we get such lovely comments. And to me, it's creating a really contextual setting. And maybe it harks back to having wanted to do stage design or set design, but create this place that people can come into and get immersed in and be really inspired by.
And what can you tell us about your stand this year? So we're in April now as we talk, and we've probably got about 4 or 5 weeks till Chelsea.
Yes, we've got 2 weeks until we go on site and start building. We have a 2-week period to build, and we've used the same builder now for probably about 12 years, which is lovely. There's a little team of us who know each other really well. Last year, we did everything ourselves. We grew all the plants. I was in complete control, which I liked. This year, I'm not. And I'm really learning that it's fine. I don't have to be in control. But we are working with the Pig, who is just a wonderful hotel group. And they have our greenhouses in many of their sites. Where there's no greenhouse, we're very fortunate that they have chosen Alitex right at the very beginning of their journey to be their greenhouse partner. And we love doing things with some of our friends and some of our kind of partnerships. And Chelsea's a lovely environment for them to show off what they do and the importance of their garden spaces as well as their hotels and their ethos behind the food. And we love championing them. So they're doing a lot of the growing, and they're going to plant. We're going to be there itching to kind of get our hands in the soil and sort of help do that too. But it's going to be really a sort of taste. If you've never been to a Pig, it's going to give you a lovely taste of the Pig, but also growing your own and dining. So the large greenhouse is going to very much have that sort of lovely pig conservatory vibe. Amber, who works at the pig, is doing, she works with Judy Hudson, who is the amazing style behind the interiors. She's going to help us do styling inside. So yeah, I think it's going to be hopefully another lovely stand, but we'll have just a different feel to it.
And do you get quite tense before Chelsea? Is it quite a nerve-wracking thing?
You always think, even though I've done it so many times. Today I've been just doing the signage, and because we're working with a lovely company called Stark and Greensmith, and we're doing a modern take on like railings, just like simple garden railings, but they do laser cut steel, which they then rust and patinate, and so it's going to be quite an unusual fence. But normally my sign goes in the spot where the fencing is going to be running. So little things like that. Well, how do we do a sign that doesn't feel like an afterthought, but it's going to stand out, because it's important that people know, okay, this is the Alitex stand, and obviously it's the biggest single expense we have in the year. It's a huge deal. It's a pop-up shop, the best horticultural pop-up shop in the world, I think, without doubt. But we're there for people to be seeing Alitex, reminded of Alitex, introduced to Alitex. So signage is really important. So, it's easy to forget things if you're not going. I'm a list maker. And also we have a new events manager who's joined us a year ago. And the idea is sort of, she's going to take the reins, and next year I will stand right back and watch her do Chelsea, which, God, I'm going to fight hard. But it's not good for one person to do the same thing all the time. It's not healthy. So this year is sort of an overlap, and then next year I will be pulling back a bit. So I've got to get used to this lack of control. And she's brilliantly organized. She's got spreadsheets, which I've never had. I have bits of paper and post-it notes.
But it's worked.
It works. Yeah. And I think when there is definitely an old school, new school in terms of tech and how you use it, and it works for you. And I missed it every step of the way. So, it was never at school. It was never at poly. It was never, it was never part of growing up or life. I've learned to cope with it, but that's probably as good as it gets.
And what about the awards at Chelsea? How do you feel about that?
Oh gosh, well, last year they've changed the way they do the awards, and they used to have like the top 5 and a little glass trophy, which for years and years we were very lucky to have. And then they brought it in line with the rest of the awards at Chelsea, so they had Best in Show. And early on, and this is now about 10 years ago, we got a couple of Best in Shows, and then we got the Director General. She could choose, still as a woman, she could choose who she chose as the winner for her. So we won those, and then we had a very quiet period of not. And obviously that's, there are 400, more than 400, 800, ridiculous, hundreds and hundreds of trade stands. And you can't go there thinking about that or caring about that, actually, because that's a lovely added bonus, but we're not doing anything for that, if that makes sense. There's a lovely aspect of the pressure is not on us in that regard, because the show gardens, obviously, the gold medal and the Best in Show and the People's Choice are huge accolades that are really, really important. But for us, they should never be focal point. They're a nice icing on the cake, and they're a nice thing that brings the team together. And last year was really special because we'd done everything ourselves, and we'd grown the plants here. We'd even, a team of us went to a local farmer and made wigwams for the stuff to grow up, and everyone planted the stand. It was a real homespun affair, and to win Best in Show last year was just really lovely for that recognition for everybody, really.
Yeah, many congratulations. The stand was fantastic. It looked absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure it will again this year. I can't wait to see it.
No, it'll be lovely. Yeah.
And the other thing that strikes me about Alitex is that you moved to where you are now in the Suffolk Downs in 2006, I think. And on the site, you've got your factory, but also wonderful displays of the greenhouses. So what was that like to move there and to effectively for your home to become your place of work?
Well, it's not my home, so we don't live here. We live about 5 miles away. And it was in Alton where Alitex. So Alitex only had two homes. In Alton where it started, and then here. I think we came here in 2001 actually. So we've been here a bit longer. But we in Alton, the factory was right beside the train station, and there were a few little not brilliant displays of what we did, but it's beside a train station. And we didn't have our own loo. They used to buy a bumper pack of platform tickets, so people who worked there used to use the toilet on the platform. And then there was an office a couple of miles away, so people were always going backwards and forwards between the two, and it was fine. It was how businesses start, wasn't it? You do what feels right. But as we got bigger and more focused on more of a domestic product, because we started being much more nurserymen's greenhouses, it seemed evident that we needed somewhere where everyone could be in the same place together. And you can pop into the factory and have a conversation as a designer, or from the factory pop in, and we can bring people here, have show sites, have greenhouses, have open days, have events. And like most things, we found this site by chance and by fortune. And we've been investing in it slowly and steadily ever since. We're just doing I would imagine, the last tranche of investment in a building that we're sitting in now, which is a new office building, trying to be very environmentally friendly, but very outward focusing. The original footprint was two barns. Not sounds like that, but you say the word barn, it can sound lovely, but no, real basic, big rectangle buildings. So we always wanted to take it up a notch. So we're getting there, we're nearly done. And then we can just plant it, enjoy it, and just invite people here, because there's nothing nicer really than inviting people here. They can look around the factory, see how it's made, look at the greenhouses, and just get a sense of who we are, really.
And who you are is a lot to do with you and your family. You bought the business, I think, in 1990, Alitex. So one of the questions I really keep to ask you is about what it's like to work with the family, because you have a number of members of your family in the business. So would you like to tell the listeners the family members that are in the business and how that works? What are the great things about it, and what are the more challenging things of working with family members?
So at the moment, I work with Tom. Tom is now the chairman, because he's trying to move away from day-to-day running to be able to sort of think a bit more away from all the things that consume you on a daily basis. So we're here pretty much all the time. Then there's Tom's dad, who comes in once a week, and he's a wise old head, and he's a farmer, and he's been a very bold farmer over the years, and been quite pioneering in many regards. People is hugely important, and so he will always be going, making sure we're doing the right thing by all the people here. And he sees our business from a customer point of view, as well as a very significant stakeholders point of view. And there's Uncle Jim, who probably is the most outrageous of everybody, because he's wonderful, but Uncle Jim will do exactly what he wants to do, and no one argues with him, and he gets away with it. He keeps our grounds in good order. We've now got Eddie, who works with Jim too. So there are four of us. And I don't sit in the same office as Tom, because that would be brilliant. Luckily, he's very, going back to the spreadsheets, he's very spreadsheets and strategy and high thinking and numbers, and I'm not. So, the only problem is occasionally if you try and have rules about not talking about work at home, but that doesn't always work. You can have rules, but I don't think anybody who works in family businesses abides by them. So I suppose the downside for me is that life can just be all consuming, Alitex or family, and it doesn't leave space for other things. But even though we have had obviously challenges along the way, I think we've been fortunate. We have an amazing team here, and we've always been fortunate to have great people, and that makes it all the more worthwhile. And we're bigger, so there's not shy of 100 people at Alitex. So it's not as if there's 4 of you and you're just all sitting in a room together, which I don't think I could do that level of intensity.
And when you think back over your career now, if somebody was listening to this podcast and they thought, my goodness, what could be a better job than being the creative director of a brilliant gardening brand like Alitex, and going to Chelsea and selling your product around the world and selling your product into some of the most famous botanical sites, Kew Gardens, I mean, Lord knows where you are. I mean, all over the place. What advice would you give them to a job like yours?
Well, I suppose I've always been lucky. We mentioned earlier that I've worked in something I enjoy doing, and I worked my way up when I was in the hospitality sector, um, hot washing, chopping stuff in a kitchen, clearing tables, doing everything all the way through. And then I got to a great role at All Bar One. I was, and I didn't just land at the great role at All Bar One. It was a gradual process of getting experience and not being frightened of rolling my sleeves up and getting the experience, actually knowing that you're getting something from everything you're doing. Don't discount it. You're always learning a lesson. And particularly around people, because the hospitality industry, and actually, sadly, in the UK, it hasn't got hospitality is the wrong word, because you don't always get much in the way of hospitality. You get functional service, you get functional food. I think we're changing, but when you look across Europe, where there's people in their 50s and 60s and 70s working in the industry, really being very charming and chatty and taking pride in what they're doing. So I think loving what you're doing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with working your way through any industry, whether it's a gardener, whether it's, whatever industry you choose to go into. If you've got something that you enjoy and you've got the energy to give to it, you're always going to be learning. And I think it was just a really obvious, and your skills will transfer in lots of different ways that you may not think about. I would never have thought I'd be working in a greenhouse business. It wasn't, don't worry about the end route. Just be in the now and really get what you can in the now. And just be open to what comes your way and see opportunity rather than obstacle.
And you were saying earlier, in fact, I think you said it twice, that for you, when you're talking to young people, the most important thing is to find a job you're happy in. What should people do if they're not happy in their job?
I suppose the only thing you can control is how you're feeling about a situation. You can't really control other people. You can have a bit of impact, you can try and make a bit of change, but if something really doesn't suit you, and we know at Alitex we have people that doesn't quite work for, and that's fine. What we'd like to do is help them, rather than be angry and go, oh, you're not doing your job. Okay, well, what is right for you? Support them in taking the next step into something that suits them. We had a member of our team recently. One thing I've always done is roll my sleeves up and get my hands dirty, and I don't mind doing that. And wonderful member of our team, but gardening was not for her. Being dirty, literally, was not for her. She now works in the world of super yachts, where you don't get dirty, and it's she's thriving. She was great. All the skills here were wonderful, and we're really happy for her because she was just trying to be true to herself. And I think if you're not true to yourself, sometimes there's potential, you just got to stick it out. Sometimes it's just time to take a gear change, and there's nothing wrong in that. Just because you're a young adult and you don't know where you're going to go, don't worry about where you're going to go. Just what can I do now to get the most out of this situation, whatever it might be.
And is that your philosophy broadly for how you manage the team at Alitex?
I'm very much a now person. I think sitting worrying about what it might happen is fruitless. Because all you're doing is you're just stuck in your imagination there. You've got no necessary fact half the time. And half of our worry comes from imagination, doesn't it? I do think rolling your sleeves up, communicating, talking to the team. I think, we try to communicate, we try to keep everyone here informed. COVID was interesting because as a manufacturing business, we had a very short time where we were closed, and then the government was trying to encourage manufacturing. We had a large open space, so people weren't working close. They had a huge area that they could work in. And then when installing was allowed to happen, again, because they're outside, they were working as bubbles. So, we gradually opened the business, but office workers were at home, furloughed for a period, but we were then gradually getting back up to full strength. But our concern then was, oh my God, how are we going to communicate with everybody? So we started doing Friday updates, started doing videos where we were just, this is what's happened this week, and this sales, this is interesting stuff that's going on in the business. And actually, we've continued to do that now. So every Friday there's a video that goes out. And obviously we had lockdown in March, and then by the end of that year, we were thinking, we were going into more uncertainty as we went into that winter, weren't we? And then we decided to do Feel Good February because we thought, well, we all could do with a bit of a lift. And throughout lockdown, we did playlists. The very first kitchen disco was in April 2020, I think, and we just shared it with everyone. And then we did some online parties. And we're just trying to kind of gather people together in whatever way. I think we were all trying to do that, really, weren't we? Just how can we be a community still, even though it's quite disparate? So yeah, I think talking to everybody, communicating, trying to have some fun. And work is quite serious, but we don't want to take ourselves so seriously we forget to have fun and be kind to each other. Really.
I think that's a great note on which to end. And for me to wish you every success at Chelsea in 4 or 5 weeks' time, and to congratulate you on all you've achieved at Alitex. As I say, you produce the most beautiful greenhouses that are seen around the world, and you are a constant source of pleasure at Chelsea to, I know, thousands of people who visit there and have your greenhouses. So Nelly, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for telling us about Alitex.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Come and say hi. We'll pour you a nice cold drink.
We will. We'll be there on Wednesday. Judith and I always go on Wednesday morning.
Brilliant. All right. Take care. Thank you very much.
If you're there, I'll come and say hello. But thanks so much for your time.